Dear participants of this International Congress of Educational Research, my name is Dirk Hastedt and I'm the Executive Director of IEA. And I'm honored to talk to you about educational research and what IEA is doing with respect to big data to inform educational policy within the next 45 minutes. Let me start by giving you a short introduction to IEA. IEA stands for International Association for the Evaluation of Educational Achievement. We are a non-governmental research organization founded officially in 1958. We are an independent international cooperative of national research institutions and also governmental research agencies. And we are conducting large-scale comparative studies of educational achievement and other aspects related to achievement. We have more than 60 member country institutions and nearly 100 education systems participate in IEA studies. Let me show you a short video that shows our work and how we are conducting our studies.
The IEA is an independent, nonprofit research cooperative committed to helping the world understand how to improve education for all. We bring together independent educational research centers, government agencies, academics, and analysts, and investigate how student performance is related to national curricula. To achieve this, we design and conduct large-scale comparative studies. These studies assess student performance around the world, investigating such subjects as mathematics and science, how well children read, their computer and information literacy skills, and understanding of civics and citizenship. We also investigate early childhood education and language and teacher education. Our network includes more than 60 member countries, and over 100 educational systems participate in our studies. Most studies involve the assessment of more than 300,000 students, ensuring reliable and high-quality data that enables valid cross-country and within-country comparisons. Since 1967, we have conducted more than 30 research studies, making the results freely available to researchers, teachers, policymakers, and governments to promote informed decision-making and improve education. We also offer countries tailored solutions designed to expand their own educational research capacity and knowledge. Together, we are learning more about school education. By linking research, policy, and practice, the IEA helps to build a better educated world. IEA, researching education, improving learning.
I hope you found this video helpful to understand our work better. As I said, we have member countries from all around the world. We have members from the Americas, from Europe, from Africa, and from Asia. And even Australia and New Zealand are members of the IEA. We're currently conducting 4 large-scale assessment and measuring trends. First, there is TIMSS, our Trends in International Mathematics and Science Study. In TIMSS, we are measuring the mathematics and science achievement of grade 4 and grade 8 students. TIMSS was first conducted in 1995 and since then every 4 years, which gives us the longest trends measures in international large-scale assessments around the world. In our Progress in International Reading Literacy study, we are measuring the reading literacy abilities of grade 4 students. PEARLS was conducted the first time in 2001, and since then, every 5 years. In our International Civic and Citizenship study, we are looking at attitudes, behavior, and knowledge in the area of civic and citizenship of grade 8 students. ICCS was first conducted in 2009 and also repeated regularly after that. In ICILS, our International Computer Information Literacy study, we are measuring the information literacy and computational thinking skills of grade 8 students. ICILS was conducted the first time in 2013, and currently we are in our third cycle of ICILS. As a response to the COVID-19 crisis, we also launched two new initiatives. One is a response to educational disruption survey, REDS, which we are conducting in partnership with UNESCO and the European Commission. In REDS, we are looking how schools and teachers are responding to the current crisis and the disruption we have seen in the educational systems due to COVID-19. In our quick study, which is the acronym for Continuity and Changes in Terms of Crisis, we are partnering with the University of Hamburg and the Institute for Pedagogy of Science in Kiel. In quick, we are collecting longitudinal data from school principals, but also from teachers in Germany to see how they deal with the current crisis and what effects and impacts they see for education in these times. All IEA studies are based on a curriculum model. This means we are looking at the intended curriculum. So what the policy in a country describes as what should be taught to students at specific grade levels in the different subjects. Then we look at the implemented curriculum. So what teachers are actually teaching in the classroom to the students. And lastly, we are measuring the student outcome, so the attained curriculum. With this curriculum model, we have not only achievement data, but it's also put into context of the learning in each country. So what policymakers want students to learn, what actually happens in the classroom, and finally, what are the outcomes. This gives a wealth of data that can be used for evidence-based policymaking. But now let me also show you another short video to show how we are working in our studies, how the countries are involved, and how actually the studies are conducted in each and every country. Let's now take a look at the changes that we are seeing with respect to education worldwide. We see that educational policies, educational practices, as well as educational research is changing significantly and has changed. These changes are based on internal and also external factors that are coming to education. This is of course good and necessary. As the field of research evolves, both the overarching game of large-scale assessment and the methodologies and technologies for the implementation have developed and changed and improved significantly. So let's now take a look at these three pillars: educational practice, educational policies, and educational research. These are all influenced by external factors. We see that globalization is clearly affecting all three aspects. The competition and connectedness is impacting educational policies. The worldwide cooperation also influences educational research, as we can see also with this interesting conference. The role that intergovernmental organizations play in educational policies and educational research cannot be denied. And there's plenty of research about, especially how the OECD influences the educational policies of countries. And we are probably all aware about the influence of PISA on educational research. It is argued that the globalization has diminished the control of local governments on their education and that national aspects and deepenings in educations are fading away. Father Rizvi and Bob Lingard have researched this area comprehensively, as well as many other researchers on globalization. On the other hand, data from international assessments like PISA, or IEA's, TIMSS, PIRLS, ICCS, and ICLS, are used by many researchers around the world, including those researchers who are very critical about quantitative research methods and international large-scale assessments in particular. And these huge amounts of high-quality data is a goldmine for researchers to help understanding educational processes. We are also seeing a boost in education, especially in developing countries. And the right of education for all is not only acknowledged by a minority of people anymore, but it is a consent that every child has a right to get quality education. But do all procedures and teaching style work equally well in all countries? There's a rich body of research on what works where, and that shows that it is not reasonable to simply transfer what works in the global north to the global south, and that appropriate methods are necessary, which creates new challenges for educational practice and also educational research. For example, Rusosovsky found that different teaching styles that are positively associated with mathematics achievement in high-achieving countries are negatively associated with mathematics achievement in lower-achieving countries. This is especially true for student-centered instruction. But people are also not only bound to their countries anymore, but people also migrate between countries, as we have rarely experienced in history. Also, migration poses challenges to educational systems. The obvious challenge is that students with different mother tongues are entering into the educational systems. And to ensure good quality education for all, we need to ensure that language is not a barrier in education. But also cultural differences need to be addressed by teachers. However, some countries seem to be dealing more successfully with these challenges. I found in my own research, for example, that Canada and Singapore being more successful in integrating immigrant students in their education systems by using various measures to help the integration process. There's also an agreement that we are living in a knowledge society where economies are increasingly requiring well-educated citizens that drive economic developments. We cannot educate an elite anymore, but require more students reaching higher levels of education. This puts an immense pressure on educational practices and demands good educational research to support these new expectations. We see also major discussions on global values, and it seems to be clear that the current environmental crisis requires educated citizens. People need to understand that we cannot only jointly ensure human living on this planet. We need to find new solutions and are willing to change. Citizens are required to understand complex systems and connections and abstract terms like climate, not to be confused with weather. The European Commission has created the Education for Climate Coalition that aims at changing European education capabilities and creating a community of educators for sustainability. Also, the UNESCO has recently extended the definition of Sustainable Development Goal 4.7 from global citizenship to global citizenship and sustainable development to recognize the importance of environmental education. Due to these demands, we are also looking at the education level worldwide. There is the expectation that more students are educated and that their level of education is increasing. It is seen as a learning crisis if students are not having access to quality education and education levels are not met or even decreasing in certain areas. UNESCO is continuously warning about the learning crisis and tries to raise awareness of the investments necessary to overcome the learning crisis. Overcoming any learning crisis requires that educational systems are becoming more resilient to disturbances. How can we continue teaching in times of political unrest or violent conflicts? And how can we have a presentation here without mentioning COVID-19, one of the biggest disturbances of education worldwide ever experienced? How can we prepare education systems to continue in challenging times? This creates new challenges for educational practices, educational policies, and educational research. In the past year, we have experienced more requests from policymakers and from journalists about what we know about educational processes, challenges, and solutions based on the data and knowledge that we have from our studies and research. And there is clearly the belief that digitalization can be a solution. If we cannot continue teaching in person, remote learning offers can help students continuing their learning, but also help teaching and learning in general. So let's take a look at the digitalization. Again, we see digitalization in education with different changes. We also see that the world is moving more and more digitally. And we also see digitalization in educational research. It is obvious that our world is moving digital. An increasing number of jobs requires digital competences. But a digital world does not only affect the work life of people, but also their civic and citizenship participation. Being informed about politics today requires access to digital information, as well as the ability to evaluate digital information and to distinguish correct messages from fake news. IEA's current cycle of ICCS, IEA's International Civic and Citizenship Study, has enlarged its assessment framework to emphasize digital civic participation with all its challenges and opportunities. Already in the last cycle in 2016, the study assessed the trust of students in social media and saw significant differences between countries, with less than 30% of students, for example, in Flemish part of Belgium or the Netherlands, trusting information from social media, to more than 60% of the students in the Dominican Republic, Bulgaria, or Malta. Also, all communication is moving more digital. Instead of letters, today people are communicating via emails, social media, or other digital means. This does not only require access to digital devices, but also knowledge on how to communicate digitally, how to find and produce digital content effectively. IEA's International Computer Information Literacy Study is currently in its third cycle, with an increasing number of countries participating. ICLS is investigating grade 8 students' ability to use computers to investigate, create, and communicate in order to participate effectively at home, at school, in the workplace, and in the community. Results from previous cycles of ICLS have shown that it is a myth that students are digital natives. Students need to be taught how to use digital devices effectively in schools. And there's a big risk of a digital divide if we leave the transmission of these competencies to students' homes. But more general, people are increasingly getting all information in digital formats. Instead of libraries, people are counting on digital libraries and websites like Wikipedia. Reading text in a digital environment requires different abilities. Digital texts are often non-continuous and include hyperlinks. IEA's Progress in International Reading Literacy study PIRLS is assessing the reading abilities of grade 4 students every 5 years since 2001. And since 2016, PIRLS also assesses online reading abilities of students in an ePIRLS module. Interestingly, we found that students in different countries have varying abilities coping with digital text and compared to reading text on paper. Students, for example, in the United Arab Emirates, Singapore, or Denmark, were stronger in the reading digital text compared to reading text on paper, whereas the students in Slovenia, Italy, or Chinese Taipei were stronger in reading paper-based text. But also the teaching in school is moving digital. We see an increase of digitalization in education worldwide. There's an increasing amount of digital learning resources. We see digital tools being used, although we see also that still traditional teaching is mostly used also in the digital environment. Digitalization of education can also target remote students. We can also help students not performing that good with modern learning tools. This helps education systems being more resilient. But we need to make sure that we also digitalize our teachers, which is currently still a bottleneck in a lot of education systems. And generally, of course, there's still the question if digitalization of education is really beneficial. And we know that there are voices that say that it is not the case. When education is moving digital, it means that we also have to go digital for educational research. So more and more educational research studies are moving digital. PISA, PIRLS, TIMSS, ICLF was always digital, because this is reflecting the learning reality of students increasingly. It also has a lot of advantages, like the ability to use adaptive test designs. We also saw that digital assessments are much more engaging to the students participating in these studies. And finally, it's also possible to use the log data to have more in-depth research on how students are maneuvering through the test, how much time it takes them for each of the items to work on it. This gives us good insight into the learning of students. But of course, there is also challenging. One of the challenges, of course, if we move digital in education research, that we still need to maintain trends. We don't want to lose the trends of the paper assessments that we've done before. It's also important that if we move our assessments digital, that we still measure, for example, students' science knowledge, and we're not mixing that up with their digital skills. And still, the amount of good models to use the log data is still a bottleneck. We need better research also in this field to advance the use of log data and to advance educational research in general. Let's now take a look at some results from our International Computer Information Literacy study that was conducted in 2018, so just prior to the current crisis. ICLS is designed to respond to a question of critical interest today: how well are students prepared to work, study, and live in a digital world? It includes background information from schools, mathematics and science teachers, students, and technical coordinators. Data from 14 educational systems were collected in 2018. We assessed more than 46,000 students worldwide. We could distinguish between different levels of knowledge in the area of computer information literacy. The students working at level 1 demonstrate a functional working knowledge of computers as tools and a basic understanding of the consequences of computers being accessed by multiple users. For example, they can open a link in a new browser tab, identify who receives an email by carbon copy, or insert an image into a document. 25% of students reach this level. 18% of the students we found still below that basic level. Students working at level 2 use computers to complete basic and explicit information gathering and management tasks. For example, they can add context to a collaborative workspace, navigate to a URL presented in plain text, and they know that search engines can prioritize sponsored content over non-sponsored content. We found 36% of the students at this level. Students working at level 3 demonstrate the capacity to work independently when using computers as information gathering and management tools. For example, they identify that a generic greeting in an email suggests that the sender does not know the recipient. They can select relevant information according to given criteria to include in a website. 19% of the students were reaching this level. Students working at level 4 select the most relevant information to use for communicative purposes. They evaluate usefulness of information based on criteria associated with need and evaluate the reliability of information based on its content and probable origin. For example, they evaluate the reliability of information intended to promote a product on a commercial website. They select from sources and adapt text for a presentation so that it suits a specific audience and purpose. Sadly, we found only 2% of the students reaching this highest level. There's also a myth that computers are a boys' domain. But what we found is that female students outperformed male students. And this was a consistent finding across all countries participating in ICLS. Interestingly, the result for the computational thinking domain of ICLS was different. Internationally, male students performed better than female students, but only very little. Looking at country level, boys performed better in Portugal, United States, or North Rhine-Westphalia in Germany, whereas girls did better in Finland. In all other countries, there was no statistically significant difference. Indeed, in Denmark, the average scores for boys and girls were exactly the same. And bear in mind, we measure with a very, very high level of precision. But now let's also listen to someone else who can say a little bit more about ICLS.
For me, the takeaway for policymakers, there are a number in ICILS. The first one is that we see quite clearly in ICILS that teachers are more likely, they report that they are more likely to teach the fundamental skills that we are assessing in ICILS if those teachers are working in schools where they feel there is a collaborative, supportive environment for the use of ICT in teaching.
Let's now come to some results from TIMSS 2019 that I found particularly interesting and relevant for policies. In IEA's TIMSS 2019, we measured the mathematics and science achievement of grade 4 and grade 8 students. 2019, the data was collected just prior to the COVID-19 crisis. The results were published end of 2020. TIMSS includes background information from schools, mathematics and science teachers, students, and also for the grade 4 students from the parents. Data from 64 countries and 8 benchmark systems were collected. We assessed more than 600,000 students worldwide. With 2019, we have a measurement of trends since 1995 to 2019, so we have 24 years of trends. And here's one result that I found particularly interesting. We are talking in the COVID-19 crisis and in terms of digital teaching, learning, a lot about students who have no access to computers or tablets. What we found that 12% of the grade 4 students in the assessed education systems had no computer or tablet available, so were not prepared for digital teaching and learning. But we found that a higher percentage, 90% of the students, they had no study desk. And that's, I think, sometimes one thing that we are losing out of sight. It's not sufficient to equip students with digital devices, but students also need a quiet place to work if they can't go to school but have to learn at home. For grade 8, we saw a similar result. 11% of the students had no computer or tablet, but again, a higher percentage, 17%, had no study desk where they could learn at home. Of course, we see that availability of study desk and computers varies substantially also between countries. We see higher percentages in countries, for example, like Morocco or South Africa, and lower percentages in countries like Sweden, Finland, or Australia, Korea. So different countries are having different obstacles of students learning at home. If we look at who is affected the most in the countries, we looked at the lower performing students, the students achieving below the benchmark of 400, the lowest benchmark, and the students at the most advanced benchmark. And clearly what we could see that for computers or tablets, there's a much higher percentage among the lower performing students who don't have these materials available, which means that if we go for digital teaching, these lower performing students will again be penalized more because they don't have the devices at home to learn at home. And the very same is true for students without a study desk. Again, the students who are at the advanced benchmark, so who are performing already better, are affected much lower by the lack of study desk and a quiet place to work than the students who are already at a lower achievement level. And again, we found that on average 70% of the students at the advanced international benchmark are lacking a study desk, but 26% of the students reaching only the low international benchmark having no study desk. So I think this is very policy relevant, and that's something that policymakers need to take into consideration when we talk about remote teaching and students learning at home. But these are just my takeaways from Tim's, or some takeaways. Let's now give also the voice to someone else. We have Sue Thompson. She's at the Australian Council for Educational Research and also study director for TIMS in Australia. So let's see what she has to say.
I think that one of the continuing messages that we get from studies like TIMS is the effect of socioeconomic background on achievement. Within Australia, one of our national policies is the Alice Springs Declaration on Schooling. And in that, it outlines what our policy priorities are. They're decreasing gaps between rich and poor students. They're decreasing gaps between First Nations students and other students, etc. So it's looking at disadvantage and trying to decrease that disadvantage. And I think that what we get from TIMS is we keep getting this picture of how strongly socioeconomic disadvantage is associated with achievement. And I think that is a critical message that needs to keep being raised with policymakers. It needs that light shone on it so that it's not forgotten about, because those things aren't changing and don't change unless there are structural changes made. And I think one of the most important messages to policymakers is that there are big gaps between advantaged students and disadvantaged students, and those are what we need to address in order to lift our performance internationally.
So, where do we go from here? Digital assessments mirror the need of education systems around the world to prepare students for the realities of this changing world. Technology advances find their way into education and daily lives of students, and they need to be considered as new realities also for student assessments. But this offers also new opportunities. Well-designed digital assessment of student achievement afford educators and researchers deeper insight into how students approach questions, how they solve problems, and how they communicate their approaches to solutions to these tasks. The TIMS problem-solving inquiry tasks were introduced in the 2019 cycle of TIMS. New innovative item formats can be administered only on digital devices. We've learned that they are very engaging for students, and they capture aspects of learning that otherwise are very difficult to gather in a paper format. For example, higher order thinking skills. Findings from the TIMS 2019 PSIs will be released at the end of October 2021. But beside these major products like the International Report and further reports from IEA, one big opportunity are public use databases. These databases become richer as we move to fully digital assessment and include also process data. This is, for example, the time that it takes students to work on each item. And the important thing is all data from IEA studies is available for researchers. So you can all download it at the IEA website and our data repository. And we see that researchers from all around the world are already making good use of the data. We are regularly checking all the publications for usage of IEA data, and we find many usage around the world of researchers from very different areas that use the IEA data. There's also the opportunity to publish with IEA. If researchers want to work with IEA data, they can also submit papers to our journal. And I'm inviting all of you to make use of the data and use it for research and submit your research to us. But let's now also listen to Stefan Hermanns, the Director of the Directorate for Policy and Strategy and Evaluation of the European Commission.
My name is Stefan Hermanns, and I'm the Director for Policy Strategy and Evaluation in the Department for Education, Culture, Youth and Sport at the European Commission. At the European Commission, we value policy making that is evidence-based, and that requires internationally comparable data. Education is too important for ill-based experiments. If education is the future, then quality education, accessible and inclusive, is the vision to pursue. The COVID-19 pandemic has put unprecedented pressure on the education and training sector, aggravating pre-existing challenges, not least inequalities. This shows once more the importance of building resilient education and training systems, starting with robust, comparable data to guide our policy making. To develop what political leaders call the European education area, it will be essential to monitor education outcomes. EU member states agreed on a range of EU targets and on the use and further development of indicators to do so. Just to give you one example, acquiring digital skills has become a must in today's society. But how do we know where we really stand on this? Should we rely on self-reporting alone? Or can we strengthen our knowledge base on actual testing of digital skills? And here it turned out the IEA studies are a great asset to support the digital transition the European Commission advocates. The International Computer and Information Literacy Study, developed by the IEA, which relies on direct measurement of digital skills, became the reference point in the EU's education policy agenda concerning digital skills. Challenges in education are bigger than acquiring digital skills alone. But in every step we take, reliable data and evidence are a solid base to strengthen the impact of our policies.
Thank you very much. I hope you found this interesting, and I'm looking forward to hear your comments or have questions from you.